episode of Notes from the Aleph. An Aleph is a high point from which all things are visible, and from our vantage point, we'll be looking at tabletop role-playing games, their design, and the theory behind those designs. Around here, our motto is to be fair, build up, and have fun. I'm your host, GriffinVarro, joined by our editor Theta, our local designer, Norman Rafferty, and of course, our good friend and GM, Lessons Learned right here. When it comes to tabletop games, I have 15 years of experience running, playing, and frequently fixing problematic rule sets at the table. Pronouns are he, him, they, them. Lessons, why don't you go next?
Yeah, I'm Lessons Learned. I'm a streamer, variety streamer over at Twitch on Lessons Learned 1. Also on my YouTube, working on my latest project, which is be about woke sci-fi, because that's the one thing you want to do in YouTube, point political fingers at fiction. And also I have a book over at Amazon, Nights and Stars, a collection of short stories, speculative fiction. And and I GM from time to time. So here I am.
And Rafferty.
Hello world, I'm Norman Rafferty, he, him, and that was my cat. Yes, I work for Sanguine Games. If you're watching this possibly in the future, we've already started work on Eumorphica, which is our next science fiction, it's a transhuman spacefaring game. But we also make Iron Claw, Urban Jungle, Vital Hearts, Myriad Song, and a bunch of other things, and I'm excited to bring them to you.
There you go. So, for today then, here's a fun math puzzle, everybody. Two parties of adventurers are heading towards the same dungeon, and one party is 7 days away, and the other one's 17. Which group has more random encounters? The answer, neither of them, because players will get bored if they don't get to the dungeon in time after 1. Here's another one, though. How long does it take your paladin to remove his heavy plate armor? The answer is, when do players ever deny wearing their armor? These are rules that are in the game that people ask for, but seemingly don't really use to their full potential most of the time. And we're here to talk about their design and, of course, how to pad your page count. Which I believe Rafferty will almost certainly have a bug to talk about.
I've never padded a page count.
Certainly not.
Everything I've ever worked on has been 100% essential.
So, what do you got to start us off with about rules that people ask for but don't use?
Put me on this. Oh man!
Oh, we can put Lessons on the spot instead if you want. But
I can do it too.
Go for it.
I'd be curious to hear what you.
Usually, that comes in my experience when somebody wants to cross a river, and the GM says, "Okay, this has to be difficult," but the players are like, "But I always wear my armor and I have strength, whatever, and I should just be able to cross." It's like, no, you should be able to walk through the bottom like you're wearing a heavy diver suit, and the player's like, oh, sleeping. It's like, and that's where the rule comes. Like, is your plate armor heavy enough to drag you to the bottom in this one instance? And how long it's going to take you to take it off and on again to get across? Because if your heavy armored paladin takes his armor, then he'll be more effective at the goblin. Ineffective at the goblin ambush when he's right in the middle of the water. So you have this sort of thing where the GM says, well, this is the perfect time for him to not have his armor. And the player's like, but the armor doesn't weigh that much. And we never talk about that. And it's going to take me forever.
You let me sleep in its last session. That wasn't a problem. Why now?
Yeah.
There's two kinds of players. The players just say armor doesn't weigh that much, and people who've actually been in the Society of Creative Anachronism are actually bored costume because you're full of shit.
Even like wearing like some basic, like slightly boiled leather is like already like a substantial amount to start carrying around.
Everybody should do a LARP, because the best part about doing, and I'm talking like a real LARP, like one that a 24-hour LARP, because they do those. Because you will realize the difference between practical clothing and armor.
You'll also realize very quickly whether or not you're equipped to go on a hike for even at least an hour.
Right.
I bet anybody to wear just a modern military helmet and web gear, which is the straps that you wear where you have all the magazines.
Yeah, and if you like put in the plates, and each of those is like 5 pounds each too.
No, that's different. Just put the web gear, which is the outside where you have all the pockets. Wear that for about 4 to 6 hours. You never wore it before. You're going to wake up in the next day with the neck feeling like it's being compressed and your back aching like somebody just stretched it out. Because although at any one moment it doesn't weigh anything, because it decides to distribute weight, your body's not used to it, and so carrying it around is something that you don't have.
Right.
Have
I
to,
mean,
so.
that's where some of the jokes come from that I think that's lost in
Mhm.
modern gaming is the idea of a warrior class. And by that we mean like this is a person who trains all the time for war. You see that militaries have boot camps, so people understand that as a concept. But it was also like the idea of the knight was what Lessons just said. It's like you have to learn how to move in the armor. So you have to like run around and wear it and get used to it and do all the acrobatic moves and also be strong enough, which means someone has to be paying you and supporting you with both good, living conditions and food and gear. And it was expensive to support these things. And then you had to have someone who was full-time trained for it. And
now, I want to say something about plate armor. Plate armor is relatively lighter than most people think it is, but it is more complex to put it on and off than people think. That's why you had squires.
yes,
That's what the role of the squire to get you off the horse and on the horse and give you weapons and allow you to strap yourself in and strap out. Once it was there and it's well made and well calibrated, you know how to use it. Yeah, of course you can go to battle. That's what it's designed for. But the real process was, okay, let's take the straps off so they'll break. You don't break the leather. You have your brigandine and your chain, and then your blade over.
Yeah, we can even simplify this by saying, like, okay, there's a stereotype of, okay, zip me up. Because the dress I'm putting on, it'd be a lot easier if someone zipped me. I might not even be able to, or be a lot better. Now, let's go back, to an era where there aren't any zippers. But before we get, too sidetracked with this,
we got 50% of the equation from the question here now, which is who asked, and the answer is Rafferty and Lessons Learned. You're the ones who asked. Now let's talk about the never using it part.
Well, I think the asking, what I wanted to say already, it's conditional. Whoever asking is whoever who thinks is going to get a benefit out of it at any one time. And that's why they want the rule. They want the rule there just in case they can use it at that one time when they get the benefit. Because people always complain there should be a rule.
But then when they don't get the benefit from it, they will never ask for that rule to be in play.
Exactly.
It's funny because encumbrance rules are a subject of debate. Because
there we go.
In older school games, the concept of the maximum load you could carry, these were Diablo-style looting. Like, you would go into a dungeon, and there would be more stuff than you could carry. And some of it was more valuable than others. So you had to make that judgments of, what am I bringing back? Because I want to get maximum money for the effort. And that was part of the fun of the experience. That's why the identify spells are difficult and complex. That's why magic items, if you test them, you don't know if they're cursed immediately. You would know it's magical, but you don't know if this is. And also, cursed items still had value. It's something I always want to point out. You could sell them. So they were.
And also you could get experience points for the magical items as well as for regular gold as well. So
it depends on who you ask. Sometimes you buy up both the experience points and the money, and then the money was worth experience points. It's goofy. I mean, like, I'm not going to defend the crap, but I will. Like, the reason why they had all those rules for that, and then henchmen and the floating disc and all that kind of stuff, was the idea. Now, we live in a modern era where encumbrance isn't a thing. Like, they recently put Dark Souls back on the internet, and it's funny because Dark Souls is the sequel to Demon Souls. Demon Souls, all your gear had weight. Dark Souls, which is easier, anything that you're not wearing doesn't weigh anything. You can carry.
Right. They simplified the equation.
Yeah, it's so bizarre. It's like you can carry as much as you want. It doesn't weigh anything. As long as only when you equip it does it have weight. And so
they throw a lot of stuff at you. If you had it, I at least know from my playthroughs of Dark Souls, if you were encumbered just for picking up some random new thing you found, you would never want to pick anything up ever again.
I'm always fond of pointing out Skyrim, which is not only 10 years old, but also based on old school, where because they are such nerds, when people shoot you with arrows, the arrows get added to your inventory.
Oh, so that's my favorite.
Of the
but
game
Skyrim is wonderful as comparison here, though, because Skyrim is a modern game that cares a lot about encumbrance, and what it does for when you play is you become a mathematician. You go, I need to get the absolute most gold worth out of every single pound I'm carrying, and everything becomes that equation from then on.
Well, and then when you discover, because health regenerates, that's when you discover I'm carrying 2,000 femur arrows because they shot me so many times. And so you just drop them in that big explosion. Right. And so, but encumbrance also issue, because a lot of people will say, well, this isn't fun. And if it's not fun, we shouldn't be doing it, because that's something we can all get behind. We should be doing fun things. Let's argue about what fun is.
Yes.
So you'll often have this. If there were no encumbrance rules at all, people would notice their absence. But also, they're included in the game, but people don't actually sit down. Well, and I don't want to say people, because I don't want to say there's some random guy who you never actually want to game with who will actually chime in and say, our group does this all the time. It's like, yes, good for you. That there's a large number of people who are used to the computer games or don't consider this to be a good use of their time. And I've already
they will calculate it out once, and that'll be it.
Right. And also there's the thing I always want to rail against, the joke. I keep seeing this joke where people would say, like, I want to walk across this wooden floor. And they would say, how much do you weigh? They would say, I weigh 100 pounds. I was pointing out, what about your gear, you asshole? I can see in the picture you're wearing plate mail. Like, I always want to make a joke about this one character as a bear and weighs like 1,000 pounds. Like, I was already joking that, someone asked me how much it happened to me in a D&D game. And I said, how much do you weigh? I say, 550 pounds. And I say, what? I was like, I have a strength of 20. I'm carrying a full load. Well, why would I not be?
You cannot be allowed on most elevators.
But it was that note. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Sorry, guys, I gotta take the break. I'm a fighter. But it's that weird notion that inventory doesn't have weight, which fascinates me. And so you do run into this problem in the gaming where, on the one, like in Dungeons and Dragons especially, you run into this problem where heavy armor is considered a class feature. Like, this is a problem with, like, I haven't played the most recent Star Wars RPGs, but I know the Star Wars RPGs always had this problem where somebody kind of wanted to be Boba Fett, but armor isn't, like, common in Star Wars because it doesn't look good and it's difficult to move in. So
if we're looking at like the D20 versions, what happens is actually even funnier, is because it's easier for you to dodge stuff when you're naked.
Right. There was this weird paradox of armor makes you, in the D20 verse, armor makes you harder to hit. So there was this weird paradox going on that, well, Jedi are naked so they can dodge, and they're just better at dodging. They're Jedi. Everybody loves Space Wizards. So the armored guys had to go and buy armor and wear heavy stuff and pay money for it that other classes were getting for free by being naked.
Right. Eventually, like, maybe you could get a very early lead if you invested heavily into it. But at a certain point, it tips the scales, and just you have absolutely no benefit from wearing it whatsoever.
Right. And so you get this weird paradox of where the gaming wants to have a heavy armor system, but they also want people to be naked and dodging because
and they also don't want to rock the boat too much either.
Well, it's also that it gets into Revenge of the Nerds that I've complained about before, where dexterity is king. Reflexes are everything. You can avoid damage, be fast. You want to shoot better and hit harder, be fast. You want to go first, fast. Reflexes, everything. But strength, what's that? So I don't know. The real thing to summarize here, I like the fact that people are talking about the idea of a load being an issue. I think the real crux of it is that we agree that being girded up for war and wearing heavy armor should be a trade-off. It should be, I'm wearing more expensive stuff at the expense of mobility and exhaustion. But the gamers, nobody we can even do a big summary of this. Nobody wants a rule that slows everyone down. Like, one thing I was fascinated with Kingmaker. You're our Kingmaker guy, right, Griffin?
That's going to be me, yes.
Okay, so there was an issue in Kingmaker where Kingmaker has a large map and you want to explore it. So your exploration speed is, of course, your movement speed, right?
That's right, and it goes according to whoever's the slowest in your group. So you don't need just one horse; you need 5.
Well, right, and also if someone was in heavy armor and only moving at a 20-foot speed instead of a 30-foot speed, then you would slow everyone down.
Right, or if you're carrying one of those heavy loads that we were talking about, now you're slowing everyone down.
Heaven forbid we go to a place, find loot, and then want to take it home.
Right.
Yeah.
So
the funniest thing with Kingmaker, of course, is the way it kind of sets itself up is it tries very hard to avoid that scenario from happening, except in maybe a handful of circumstances ever. It will never give you so much you will ever be loaded down. So it's up to player choice entirely, and if you're players and you reach level 2, you're like, wait, I have enough gold for a card, what am I doing?
Yeah.
Well, and also speaking of rules no one uses, people always want vehicle rules. It's like, yeah, let's drive a car through the untamed wilderness. I can find no problems with it.
So we at least have like one perspective here of like a rule that is at least interesting and like has a purpose, but maybe you won't use it because it's like not efficient, it slows down, or maybe doesn't fit your idea.
Yeah, no one uses
but there's one example that came up very recently from a video I think we all watched, which was you remember the gear listings in the D&D books that are the exact same every single edition with the 10-foot pole, the ladder, the bullseye lantern. And you look at it once, a character creation, and then never again.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. So, no, that video was because they talked about, once again, I talked about how old school gaming, your encumbrance was an issue. Also in old school gaming, you were going in dangerous ruins. There were deadfalls, there were fragile floors. These weren't unusual. It was, we're going to a place where no one is.
Right, so I would say like this is a different perspective on the issue of why no one's using it, and the issue is, well, because nobody plays that game anymore. But it's still there, because people are asking for it. They'd notice if it wasn't there.
They would notice if it wasn't there, but and also, yeah, the idea of deadly traps and hitting the floor with a 10-foot pole. If any of you are fans of the cartoon, because I used to complain that my game's not like the cartoon. Why isn't my game like the cartoon? The cartoon's awesome. There's one scene where they have the thief is using her 10-foot pole. The acrobat, sorry, not thief.
Yeah,
acrobat is using her pole to poke at the ground to set off the pit traps before they fall in them.
Yeah,
it's like that. Like that's the most D&D moment in the entire thing. Like no one would understand that.
But there's another rule I'm thinking about and one that is now less used, or is technically still there, but people really ignore. It's ammunition. Like many more modern games are getting rid of ammunition altogether.
You make me cry when you say that, because I was old enough to play first edition Shadowrun, and we're playing the demo adventure. I always emphasize this is not us being weird. This is the demo adventure, and we kept running out of ammo. Because we would get in firefights with people 6 feet away, and we run out of bullets before we could inflict any damage on each other.
There are other firing modes than full auto, Rafferty, I assure you.
They don't do any more damage.
There's the fact that in Shadowrun, those still are ammunition rules still can exist, but the way there's like, okay, if you do this, there's like 5 or 6 different ways of shooting, and this one is like, well, if you do this, it's a third of your ammo. But only this one will be half of your ammo. Only won't be one single shot. It's like, could you just not do that? Because to me, ammo rules only have one purpose. For the purpose of when you go click. That's when you really want to know when to
create a tension. And the question is, does that tension serve anyone's purpose as they're playing? And is that the game that they're even trying to play?
I would say that the ammo rules do not really serve that purpose.
I mean, because that's something we were biased about. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Because the thing is, if you want a situation where there's a possibility of somebody having a gun jam or empty ammo, you don't have to have an ammo rule for that. You can have a jam rule or a critical fail rule that says, okay, you roll badly. Turns out that, you hit the last and you're going to take, have a penalty to reload or something, right? If that's what you want to do and change the tempo of the play or whatever, you actually don't need ammo rules. But many games, including Dungeons and Dragons, still have ammo rules because we have to know how many,
Well,
how many arrows we bought every time, right? We went to buy,
Yeah, see, so
or how many can we make?
I can break kayfabe here because I probably should reveal this, but if you're playing Iron Claw, I was annoyed when we were like working on a second edition that people didn't track ammo anymore. So in Iron Claw, there's regular arrows and then there's expensive arrows, like Fion arrows that do extra damage. And we did that because then we made sure that regular wooden arrows were terrible. And expensive ones were limited, and because we made them expensive and special and you could get class features to get them, that meant that players were actually tracking ammo, but only for the expensive arrows because they want to do extra damage. And players being players, remember, if you're ever at less than 100%, you're losing it. I mean,
right. I think I was about to say that the player conceit is that the player never wants to be disarmed at any moment, and losing all of their ammo means that they're disarmed and they're helpless. And well, now I have to run away or plan again. And that's something everyone tries to avoid.
I mean, on the one hand, the idea that you're exhausting bullets, but also role-playing games are silly when it comes to bullets. Like, because they'll have the weird thing of where you fire one bullet every 6 seconds, which is completely unrealistic. Realistically, what most people do is they usually fire 2 or 3 bullets at a time. I mean, I've been trained in firearms. They told me shoot multiple shots.
Yeah,
you don't just fire once. You fire multiple times, at the center of body mass to try and hit. And if the target doesn't look like it's going down, you keep shooting. And so the idea that really what ammo should be a reflection of accuracy, like the idea that a better shot will be able to take a target out in fewer shots because they would miss less often. And most of the time in role-playing games, you actually see the opposite. You are actually better off firing single shots than you are, because somehow ripping the clip might do more damage, but they always lower your accuracy because recoil exists.
Right.
So, some nebulousness. And it's also the kind of weird bias. I've seen a lot more games that are doing the idea of you have infinite ammo unless you roll badly, in which case you run out of ammo. And
where it's a glitch or a critical miss or something like that.
Right, which can lead to weird repercussions because that means that, well, submachine gun or auto-fire shotguns, which in reality would be ridiculously onerous to carry because you go through ammo so quickly. It's like one problem with rapid-fire weapons, especially shotguns, because shotgun shells are huge and heavy. And you would go through this very, very quickly, so you want to conserve ammo. But if you don't have ammo as a concept, you could just rip the clip every single time. If it's just random whether I run out of bullets or not, you'll be ripping the clip every single time. Just fire.
Yeah, why not use all of your ammunition if it's infinite? Why not just hold down the trigger?
But I think it's, again, we might talk about this later episodes. It's about creating that moment of tension. Because, again, if you miss, for example, you can have all the ammunition in the world. If you miss, you do minimal damage because of damage protection, something like that, then it depends on other mechanics.
Because speaking of other mechanics, like in theory, what it would be is if you were in a firefight, and I'm talking like we made Urban Jungle, so we want to do gangster style firefights. A firefight might be some people taking cover and other people taking cover and exchanging bullets back and forth. And what might happen before you shot and killed each other, because this is a role-playing game and for some reason the first bullet doesn't kill you, what might happen is as you're shooting at each other with this punctuated battle, someone might run out of bullets. And when someone runs out of bullets, they have to stop and reload.
That would be your turn to take advantage of that.
Right, that would be they're reloading, let's get them, or they've stopped shooting because they have to reload. And I know that this is an aspect of players. Let's get the hell out of here. Because once he's fired 6 shots, I know he's out. I can either go get him or I could run away across the open ground because I could get to cover before he gets to reload, which is both a narrative thing and a strategic thing. But in order for that to happen, you have to have the concept of ammo. And one of the problems is modern gaming is very much if it's a set piece battle, it's assumed that the players will win, and it's assumed that
they'll stay there and complete the whole scene, right?
Right.
While we're on guns, let's go back to more rules that nobody ever uses, and I know a rule that absolutely no one has ever used, and that is the Dungeons and Dragons firearm rules. Never even once, not even slightly, nowhere adjacent to it, and even the content like out there that's supposed to be like sci-fi or more advanced specifically doesn't use them either. Everyone avoids them no matter what. When they put them into their new DMG, it is just 5 pages of nobody's going to look at it.
It was the weirdest thing because they led with it. Like they advertised, "Hey guys, we now have guns in D&D." And before DMG came out,
they've been there. They've been there before. They've done this exact same stuff. They reprinted the exact same rules, and no one will use those either.
It's weird. They must think they're great.
Yeah.
They must think they're great because it keeps anyone from using it.
I think it's a combination of things. If I remember, the earliest time that guns appeared was because the rules were there so you could port from, what was the Western game that TSR had? Yeah, Boot Hill. And so the idea was that all these games were in a sort of multiverse where you could go from Boot Hill to D&D to somewhere else, right? And of course, if Boot Hill had gun rules and somebody took a gun to whatever game you were playing, then that you have to have the rules for that, right? And so that was happening. And then they kept making, and second edition had a entire expansion of the Green Books, which was in the not Victorian era, but the era of the 7-year and the 14-year war era, basically.
Which is one of my favorite gaming books of all time, A Mighty Fortress. I recommend it, even though it's one of the older games. It comes with a big disclaimer of this might insult you and your and all your friends. No, it's really good.
I think the only one of those books that I have was the Celtic game, and mostly for the monsters. But anyway, and so they had that. And then in third edition, but that second edition was, first and second edition was, if you roll that was the only weapon that had exploding dice damage.
Open-ended, yeah.
Yeah, so, hey, it not only did roll a high die, like a D10 for a basic handgun, like you roll a D10, you could kill a dragon with, enough D10s roll around. It's like, I just shoot him once. It's like, that's realistic, but I have a sword.
Well, and see, that gets into something because when we started doing our game design, this isn't exactly a rule no one uses, but this is like an example that shows up. If someone pulls out a gun and threatens to shoot you in a role-playing game, you immediately know that, that's just going to do up to 8 points of damage. That's not going to stop me.
Right.
You can't threaten me at gunpoint and tell me don't come any closer because it won't stop me. This was also a problem in the vampire game. In the vampire game, guns did like 2-3 points of damage. Aggravated, yes, but most players had 7, 8, or 9 hit points. They could take a hit from a bullet and still come across the room and disarm you or wrestle you to the ground. And it might take them a whopping 2 weeks to heal from the gunshot wound. But it was like they could still do it. It wouldn't stop them.
You could still theoretically get out of that situation alive.
Right. And then you also have the meta knowledge that showed up in the games. If someone has a gun and points it at someone else and says, if you come any closer, I'll shoot them. You have the meta knowledge of knowing, I know that gun can't kill them because I know that it can only do up to this amount of damage. And there's no way you could one-shot them in the perspective of the rules, take someone out. So guns lose their ability to scare you in the game, unless your GM just says, I just shoot him and he's dead, because obviously if I just pulled out my gun and shot them, they would obviously die. Everyone.
Right. You start evoking the narrative of, you go like, this is how a story would go, so this is what we're doing.
Right. That reminds me of a cutscene. Actually, I almost have a cutscene in Mass Effect where except for a couple of sections, everybody has kinetic barrier, so things that actually stop bullets.
Right.
Except when the cutscene calls for somebody get shot with one shot, they were like, boom, and they're dead. And it was inconsistent because there is a cutscene where literally one person just like fires at Shepard like 3 or 4 shots. And you can actually see it more like,
which we can do a different stream. Yeah. And me, I quit. Like I quit those games when that happens because it's like, I hate that.
It's betraying the rules that were set down in front of you because now there's a brand new one.
Well, we waited through 60 guys, and now suddenly one shot from random cringe guy over there suddenly takes us out.
Right, they changed the rules on
usually what happens is that happens to a third party in Mass Effect. The one you're talking about is Far Cry, where literally you wade through an army of people firing rockets, heavy machine guns and all that. You open a door, somebody hits you in the face, and you're like, okay, I'm captured.
The one that always made me rage quit was Dante's Inferno, because Dante's Inferno, the opening of it is you're jumping in the air, you're double jumping, you're swinging this polearm, cutting people down. You cut down dozens of people, and then you get to the last room, and it's so bad because you walk in the last room, you're looking around going, no one seems to be here, and they have like the lamest guy. They have like the lamest of the lowliest guy. He's got no armor. He's just got a dagger. He runs up to you and stabs you in the back, and you instantly die. It like doesn't even look like you can get through your armor, and you're wearing armor. It's like you instantly die, and like, now you got to go to hell. And it's like so like not even fronting. It's so bad.
Yeah.
But I mean, really, it's weird. Dungeons and Dragons. Like the people who play Dungeons and Dragons. Sorry, I promise I'll be nice. There was a weird thing going on in the 80s for a while of why people were trying to explain why magic and technology doesn't mix. There would always have to be some rule that magic somehow prevents machines from working and you couldn't mix them. Okay, that seems very quaint in this era where World of Warcraft launched. Here's a dwarf with a gun. We'll put him on the fucking front cover. This isn't your dad's role-playing game. And you also had Final Fantasy VII, which I always have to emphasize to people. Final Fantasy VII was many Westerners' first exposure to JRPGs. And not only that, but Final Fantasy VII was Square saying, okay, kid gloves are off. We're not on Nintendo. We're on PlayStation, which is for adults. Let's have brothels and pollution and backstabbing and...
You're going to be in the middle of a massive machine factory kind of layout, and you're going to be casting magic spells at robots. Have fun.
Well,
yeah, there you go.
And security guards are going to bounce bullets off your face. Like, I can't get it. Like, it was the weirdest thing. And they used to make fun of this. You can find cartoons back in the 90s of where there's Cloud wearing his t-shirt, and a security guard comes, and fires a volley of bullets, and they hit him in the face. There's little sparks flying off his face as bullets are hitting him. They animated it so you can see it. And he loses 16% of his hit points. And it was just like, wow. And then again...
Right. But bringing it back to D&D, I think those magic and technology don't mix kind of writing projects that they had were entirely just an excuse to try to keep things exactly how they envisioned it, rather than something that could actually enhance their game, or they didn't want to also admit that they didn't want to have to deal with it.
I mean, related to that, there was a weird dissonance going on that Dungeons and Dragons, when it mutated from chainmail into a role-playing game, it used to be in war games that units were either dead, maybe disabled, or fine. So if you bought a war game with tanks or whatever, we do die rolling, and it was okay, my 10 tanks advance against your 8 tanks, we roll. Okay, I destroyed 3 of yours. Remove 3 units completely. And they realized, well, if we're going to do a man-to-man game where each player only controls 1 unit, if one roll completely removes your unit, this game is going to be over pretty quickly and not going to be fun. So they added the concept of the hit points, the life bar, that you could take multiple hits. But then you had this problem where, for some reason, inserting large steel blades into your body is considered less lethal than tiny lead pellets.
Right.
Because
what damage rating do you put on a gun versus a sword? Well, obviously, a gun only does a D6 versus a sword's D12.
Right, and obviously anyone hit by a bullet instantly dies. We've been watching movies forever. You get shot and someone just clutches a non-existent wound and falls over. So people don't survive when they're hit by bullets. This is
right, but when you look at in realistic context, if you get stabbed once or you get shot 2 or 3 times, you're just dead, really. There's nothing that can be done.
Right, so there was this idea that you can't put guns in D&D because... and this is what they were trading on when they put them in D&D. in the 5th edition, wherever. You can't put a gun in D&D because a gun is so dangerous and so deadly that everyone knows that a small dagger would only do 1d4. It couldn't kill anything. But if you gave them a pistol, oh my God, the deadliness of this would like completely imbalance the game and break everything. And, you know, it wouldn't work anymore, which is why it's so, it's really tone deaf when D&D 5 did it, because D&D 5 just said, we've got guns. Look, rules for guns. They do less damage than bows. They fire less often than bows. And you can't get proficiency in them or buy them in stores. You're welcome.
Yep, a completely useless thing.
You led with this. So there was that notion. And in between there was A Mighty Fortress, which is one of my favorite books, which had the idea, well, what if we made the damage die for guns exploding? That way they would be deadly, because people would be afraid of them because they could potentially kill any target. But if you actually sit down and do the math on it, the odds of it actually killing you are really low. Like if it's even if it's rolling 1d8, you'd have to roll an 8 for damage, and then another 8, and then another 8. And the odds of all 3 of those happening at the same time, first of all, would still only be 24 points of damage, less than a fireball. And secondly, you know, the odds of that happening are extremely low. Not to mention you had to hit the target in the first place. And let's hope that it takes damage from mundane weapons. Have you noticed how much shit in D&D is immune to anything that's non-magic? So it was really weird. And it's I think, an example of the tone deafness of Dungeons. Speaking of Dungeons & Dragons having the equipment no one uses, example of tone deafness, because it's like someone writing something to make someone from the 80s really excited, and it pleased no one, because no one from the 80s wants guns in their games because they want to play the same game they played when they were babies. And no modern player is going to use any of this because, first of all, it's useless. And secondly, we've already played World of Warcraft. We've already seen guns in gaming that are effective. So, you know, it's not weird and exotic to those people.
So let's go over to like another example that we kind of mentioned a little bit earlier, which is the random encounter. So I think this one is like very obvious. Like it exists as a tool to push the players forward, or to penalize them for choosing to stay in a place without doing anything or not accomplishing their mission, or to basically fill in what's happening between point A and point B. Like that's part of your adventure. You're losing some of your resources before you even get to the dungeon. But the context on that has kind of really changed over time by the looks of it, where now it's less about the adventure of getting to a place, trying to stay there, and then trying to leave without using up all of your resources. Now it's like, I want to get along with the story. I want to go deal with the orcs over there in that castle. Why are we encountering our 5th wolf in a row? So as far as rules people don't use, I've definitely not seen it used a whole lot until I started trying to use it and get some value back out of it for basically the original purposes. What do you think, Lessons?
Well, I think it's useful in, say, the classic, you know, hex crawl, right? But then the classic hex crawl is essentially your dungeon becomes your outdoor area, right? You're shifting focus where you're still essentially in the dungeon because you have a map and it has edges, and, you know, I guess you could theoretically travel off the map, but, you know, the map is big enough, probably won't be.
It's been decontextualized to not be the play area anymore.
Yeah, exactly. So that's the main play area. So it is an expectation that if you're in that area, then yeah, those are things that you encounter because that's what you do, right? You know, monsters and other creatures and what have you. But if you have a dungeon, the expectation is that everything's going to happen in the dungeon, right? And your resources are meant to be on the dungeon. So, and the new rules of resting are designed to keep you in the dungeon. That's a big change that's happened to modern D&D. Before that, it had the sort of do a little bit of the dungeon, go back to town, go, you know, back and forth. And so one of the things about the random encounter tables was to discourage players to constantly go back to town because they could get hurt or killed along the way as well. So it kept them a little bit on the dungeon. But as people were like, well, I die either way, might as well just try to go back to town, rest, and get some, be more safe there. Right. But now that the rest rules are designed for you to stay in the dungeon as long as possible, that's really started with 4th edition. There's no reason to go back to town. Therefore, why add a rule that just forced me to rest more times in order to keep myself top off, because that's what's going to happen.
Yeah.
You're forcing a rest period. That's what you're doing.
Well,
you're not preventing it. You're forcing it.
Yeah, and I expanded on this before. Like D&D 3rd edition relaxed the resting rules. The rest, because they made basically 8 hours gets you everything. D&D 5 adds the short rest, and you had that problem of where D&D used to be a game of endurance because, like you said, the random would weigh you down. But another thing that changed was the idea of the concept of where XP comes from. Because if you come from a computer game, there's a concept from that called grinding, which is where you expose yourself to deadly harm multiple times, dozens, if not hundreds of times on purpose to advance your character. Which, when I say it like that, it sounds a little weird, and to an 80s person, it'd be pretty weird. But no, the modern focus of gaining levels is murder. It's experience points you get from killing. That's the first place, and then the second place is story. You don't get experience points anymore from treasure, which I can see why people got rid of that, because it was a lot of math, and I don't think people enjoyed doing it a lot. And the computer games didn't do that. And originally the 8-bit games, they were too simple for that. It was like, okay, something just died, I'll give you 20 experience points. I mean, that's obvious. We just did something, here's your XP. And so you run into the paradox of where random encounters don't wear you down. They're experience points. It's a monster that if I kill it, I get XP, and I level up with XP. So it's not even a threat anymore. It's, oh boy, a chance to level up.
Right, the context has completely changed on it.
Yeah, it's turned into the opposite of what it used to be. It's not, oh no, here comes a high-risk, low-reward encounter to remind me to get the hell out of here. It's the opposite. It's actually low risk now because, we can rest as much as we want. Even if we get interrupted in the rest, we can just re-rest. What are they going to do? Attack us again? And they're usually, like with D&D 5, has lairs and monsters in specific spots. A random monster, by definition, is just some random Yahoo you ran into. So they're always going to be easier than anything and because they're level matched, because the new games don't. Old games used to have big, wide brackets and often didn't care about the matching. 80 orcs could just randomly show up. They don't do that.
You find a dragon
anymore.
because the dragon lives in this area.
Yeah, and also I think it goes. Also, the change from, because not all random encounters were supposed to affect. I mean, a third to half of the random encounter lists were just either neutral or benign encounters as well. Again, the focus has been to the dungeon and the programmed nature of the encounter. Like, I have created an encounter. It's not these creatures are here and you may encounter them. No, I as a GM have created an encounter for you to engage in and get your XP.
And that's going to bring us to another rule that people ask for but don't use. And I'm going to do two of them at the same time. Language rules and reactions.
There we go.
Reaction rules. First of all, language rules. Irrelevant to the game. But like if you're playing, if anytime I'm running a modern day game, if I have an accommodating group, I might use a language barrier as a concept. Like, okay, we went to Singapore, so if you guys don't speak Cantonese, Mandarin, or Korean, that's going to be a problem.
Mm-hmm.
So usually the game will just hand wave over that. Like, it's the goofiest thing, like Cyberpunk. Hey, a bunch of Cyberpunk. Oh, look, we think Asians are really cool and scary. None of you guys, maybe Japanese? Mm-hmm. And even at that, you're speaking it with a heavily accented Japanese. I sure hope the people you're talking to aren't classist in any way.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, the Yakuza, famously accommodating and never racist in any way.
They certainly would never do anything drastic, that's for sure.
Right. So you never pass as a, guy. And when you're playing a fantasy game, like, language barriers don't come up. First of all, you murder everything you meet.
Mm-hmm.
Like, who cares? But speaking of the neutral benign, there used to be rules of you ran into a bunch of trolls or a bunch of bugbears, and they might look at you and you might look at them and try to decide if we're going to be violent or not. And they might actually have a neutral posture in the first place. And you might be able to say, hey, we got swords and wizards here. Can't help but notice you guys over there with all your swords and stuff. And you might wave at each other. You might talk a little bit. You might get some information, whatever. You might actually do a little trade. Who knows? And then part and go your separate ways. And that's like gone. Unless it's a scripted encounter, the idea that we might have to like have languages or good reactions to negotiate with other people to get the idea that we might want to negotiate to avoid a fight.
Now, let's see, that's my favorite pastime activity right there. But I'm, of course, one of the weird ones out of 100 who won't just be like, hey, bugbear's over there. Let's just kill them and take their stuff.
Well, and that gets into the other thing I'm complaining about rules we don't use, because this just came up where D&D 5 had to add them because they don't have them, which is persuasion and negotiation rules. Because apparently they had a persuade skill but doesn't do anything. The reason why those don't matter is because in standard like adventure theory, if you're supposed to get somewhere, they don't want to lock it behind a skill roll. So it might, if you have to go and convince the locals to help you, it's not a persuasion check or diplomacy check or whatever to convince them to help you. It's not that. It will be, if you go do this thing or get this thing or do this quest for us, which essentially does require a whole bunch of die rolls, and you could get killed on the way, but I guess you won't. But whatever, it won't be a skill roll. It won't be any of your abilities to persuade them or negotiate with them. It will be, you must go do this thing because that's what we were told. That's game design. That's fail forward. It's, you know, these things won't work. And so people asking for those rules of, can we use skill rolls to influence? When I say they don't use those, it's like, if the plot requires you to influence someone, there will be a way to do it without using those rules. And in fact, there will probably be a way that where the persuasion rules won't actually work. So even though players are asking for those, they don't actually do anything in the concept of the game.
Right, and I think like sitting there somewhere in the middle of all that is definitely like the fear of like some GMs of like, what if they supersede how I want things to go and actually convince someone to do something different? Now what do I do with my campaign now that they're not antagonistic?
I mean,
And the answer is like, why are you so hell bent on trying to have everything happen in exactly the same order? There's still characters and still stuff happening.
I worked really hard in this encounter.
Yeah.
Matt Mercer never has this problem.
Speaking of skills, though, specifically in D&D that don't do anything, my particular bug has definitely been medicine. And the reason why is there's basically no text there. So what is medicine supposed to do? It's supposed to heal you. Well, if you just go to sleep for 8 hours, all your HP is back, all your conditions are gone, and you're fine. So wait a second. So medicine doesn't heal you. Okay. What about diseases? You're never going to get a disease. That's another rule that never will get used. Never even once, not once in any campaign ever.
Cure disease is like a 3rd level spell.
And let's say you get poisoned in D&D 5th edition. Poison is a status condition, not something that's like a ticking time bomb about to kill you. It just gives you disadvantage, and it goes away after a certain expiration date anyway.
Just walk it off.
Yeah, you just walk it off in a couple of seconds. Like, it's going to take you at least 5 minutes to pull out the kit, get your antidote, shove it into someone, and by that point, what was the point of medicine? Heck, lessons. At the very end of the campaign you were running for us, we encountered a whole bunch of the drow who had poisoned weapons, and you know what we did? We bought a whole bunch of antitoxins. Medicine was not a skill we needed there. Not whatsoever.
Yeah, no. I mean, it wasn't meant for you. I think the problem was that in many ways, poison got a little too complicated around 3rd edition.
Oh, 100% agree.
So they simplified it back. Because in 4th edition, then it became one of the many stackable things that you could get. Like you could poison and be on fire and have acid. And you're like, okay, you're a 15-layer
player. Let me take a look
so...
what the DC for Blue Whooping Angel Dust was again.
Speaking of rules people never use, there were the crafting rules. And that's where they had the problem where in D&D 3rd edition, crafting something is proportional to its expense. And then poisons, they wanted to be expensive because they were illegal and rare, which meant it would take years to manufacture poisons.
Oh gosh, that's just like another bit of the dissonance where the way the game mechanics would play out do not represent how the game portrays these things as existing.
Well,
there's still talking about crafting rules. Sorry about that. They're still kind of in 5th edition, because the problem was in 3rd edition crafting, because items were supreme in 3rd edition. It was basically very Monty Hall. If someone, for example, had a fully kitted 10th level fighter, he would always beat a 20th level fighter because he had all the magic items, which is a tradition that goes back. You have all the pluses and all the damages and stuff like that. But the thing was that, of course, that between level 9 to 12, especially if you had a wizard and a cleric, somebody could make magic items, they just would make all this meta magic item stuff, and they only had to sacrifice XP. It's like, well, it doesn't matter. I don't have to go to level 13, 14, or 15 if I have all the gear that I'm making at level 12.
Well,
I have all the gear, it doesn't matter.
Well, there's
and
also,
then in 4th edition, they did the Residium thing, which actually you lost gold and money making magical items, so they discourage people to having magic items.
Oh no,
so they could actually end up buying.
4th edition's crafting rules were fantastic because first of all, they just put a level limit on everything, so you couldn't make it if you weren't the right level. And this is the big thing. The problem with crafting is because crafting always took an arbitrary amount of time. Like it might take 2 days or 30 days or 15 days, but it was always like an arbitrary number. And because it was that, you had to sit down and do math. The only people who were willing to do crafting were people who were willing to sit down and do all of that math. And then you had the problem of, okay, everyone else, all the rest of you have to stop doing things while I spend 15 days making this. And you would have
in fact, we don't know if it's going to be 15 days. It could be an additional 7 days because you fuck up halfway through and it penalizes you with more time. So now you guys have to wait even longer for me.
You couldn't fuck up in D&D 3rd edition. You just put in the time and it just fell out.
Right.
Okay. Yeah, it was that weird thing. And then you can't turn to a player and say, okay, like for some reason, this is always like, we had a different chat on this. You could never just tell the players, okay, then 15 days go by. No, you can't do that. Players lose their shit. It's like, I can't let 15 days go by where I do nothing. So we're seeing a good progressive modern iteration in modern games, which have what they've been calling downtime. We've been calling it montage in our games, where it's like, okay, we have the adventure that's structured where everybody gets to do stuff, and then we're going to go into another phase that's a broad amount of time. Everyone do 1 or 2 things that takes a huge amount of time. And then you give everybody something to do, like I get a job and work for money, or I make a magic item, or I work on this thing, or I get information and that kind of stuff.
And the funny thing is, like, those systems also did kind of exist already, like with like the profession stuff, where you're supposed to sit down and like work for money and waste your time there, but no one ever fixed it, so then it became a problem.
Well, they disappeared because it used to be Dungeons and Dragons. Like the old school game was, we go on a dungeon expedition, we hire a bunch of people, we schlep across this map to the ass end of nowhere because dungeons are in the middle of nowhere. Colonial subtext aside, it was also, no one's looted this yet because if it was next to the town, they would have looted it already. And it has to be in the middle of nowhere. That's why it still has treasure. And so you would go there, do the thing, grab the stuff, bring it back, sell all of the loot, and then you're not allowed to level up until you paid off training costs, which cost time and money. So everyone in the game spends time leveling up and spending money on that. And it had a sort of a punctuated equilibrium that way. It was done terribly. Like if you try to, when I say it like that, it sounds pretty cool. But if you try to go do it, it's like, of course, it's a mess of rules that are all contradictory. The modern system of beats of adventure time, montage time, adventure time, montage time works so much better, and I'm glad to see that as coming back. So that's an example of a rule that people weren't using that's actually coming back in a form people actually do.
And you're forgetting about a very specific and very important character that was always in town, and that was the Sage. Because the Sage was a character that had almost always the information you needed to prepare to go to the dangerous dungeon, and the person that would give you the information about identifying items and lore, whatever, when you came back.
Someone who actually does the research that later on is replaced by magic spells.
The idea was that you would have to prepare to go there, otherwise you didn't know what kind of weather it was going to be, or who could you hire, what you would need. So you always needed a sage that was the sort of focal point of, before you go to the adventure, you have to talk to the sage, and afterwards, well, hey, I have a bunch of this treasure and stuff. Do you know what it's actually worth, and is anything really magical? Because yes, my identify spell could work, but it could be cursed, or it could be something that's so powerful that my identify spell doesn't work at all. So
see, and you're going very gamer, because I would point out that the other thing you would often hire was the guide, which is where you would hire somebody who spoke the local language and knew the local area. So you could bring them with you, and they could tell you. One of my favorite adventures is Dwellers of the Forbidden City, which goes into great detail of unreliable narrators and guides who will tell you, oh yes, if you go to this city, you will meet the men who aren't really men, and the plants that walk like men. It's like, we meet a plant that looks like, it's not a person, it's a plant, and it will kill you. You know anything more about that? Well, no, because they killed my friends and I ran away. I decided not to hang around and die.
They look like plants and they killed everyone. That's all you need to know.
Right. Well, why are you talking to us right now? Because you've offered me something I can't refuse. Money. And
this definitely. Oh, God.
Oh, go ahead.
So this definitely would probably be a good bit of concluding statement here. And my concluding question for today would be rules that you wish people used, and I think this would definitely be mine right here. The henchman rules, being able to actually purchase services from other people that's useful, and being able to take them out on adventures, or just paying a dude a copper a day to carry your bag so you don't have to worry about the encumbrance rules anymore. That is the part that I have never seen any GM ever accept in my entire life. And they have fought me tooth and nail to the death to never use those rules.
Yeah, it's the line I want you to say to give you chills. I am sworn to carry your burdens.
So what about you, Lesson? As our sort of exit statement here, what's the rule that you wish people did use more?
I think the rule I wish people would use more would be research, because there isn't a thing of like, oh, you already know this is automatic and you know stuff, and taking the time and having the skills, because skills like going around and carousing still exist in Dungeons & Dragons, so the equivalent don't get used as much as they should. And that's ironic, because as a GM, it's like I want to have you give you the information with and make it engaging without like, you roll a die, you got a 17. Okay, you know that this isn't this. Okay. Next,
yeah, we have a very binary system in front of you here.
Yeah, exactly.
What about you, Rafferty, then? What's a system you wish people would use more that they don't?
I want to say that I am seeing progress that a lot of games are doing. Like I was already complaining about, a lot of games had these systems, but they were so badly implemented that you didn't actually do them. Because they were always going this idea that if one rule is good, then 3 rules are 3 times as good. Instead of thinking about what would people actually do, like boil it down to what is interesting about this. What is interesting about ammunition that makes it a storytelling device? And I just mentioned those, so that's why you would have those, but and that sort of thing. And really, the thing that prompted this whole thing is the one thing that I think people ask for that drives me nuts is vehicle rules.
Ah, yes, your favorite.
They're always asking for, like if you make a science fiction game, they say, where are the spaceship rules? And if you say there's no spaceship rules because you don't, it's weird. You get this in a science fiction game. People don't show up at Cyberpunk and say, where are the tugboat rules? Or people don't show up at D&D and say,
what are the exact rules for my car? I need to know its armor, its acceleration value, the highest top speed it has, and I need 20 different versions of it too.
Especially big vehicles that have multiple crew positions, which is that's why I'm bringing those up, because it's always so weird to me. Because in practice, you'll be like, maybe one of your players cares about this. The rest of them are all bored because they signed on to be sexy kobolds with machine guns. This is not interesting to them. And also the thing we also mentioned where if you have to get somewhere, like cross the river without drowning or whatever, poof, you'll just get there. The vehicles, you know, like it's not like going to be, oh, you failed the piloting roll and crashed the ship. You don't actually get to the adventure. We all know that's not going to happen. So vehicle rules. So with the examination of this, we just published, you toot my own horn, we just published Book of Corals. And for Ironclaw, so that's a piracy and high waters adventure. And we're working on Eumorphica, which is a spacefaring. And one of our goals is that a vehicle that everyone's got stations in should be something that all of you are participating in, and the choices relevant to this vehicle should all be something that propels the story or makes it interesting. If you remove or add components, if you're trading in certain goods, these should be choices that, once again, what's interesting about it, what motivates folks about it. And I've been playing a lot of role-playing games where, like I said, the vehicles I ignore because I know we're going to get to the destination on time. And cargo and trading is a waste of your time because I can't believe all these games just make it random. Like you just show up and I'll just roll randomly, see how much all this stuff is worth. It's like, well, so it doesn't matter what I have, right? It's just random. Mm-hmm. So we've been making strides in our games that if we're going to have those things, they should be boil them down to the essence and make them meaningful so players actually have buy-in and actually care.
Right. There you go.
And yeah, I mean, we're making the change we want to see in the world. I've been extremely annoyed at a lot of games that are coming out with vehicles and space worlds, and like they're just busy work. It's just, I know we're going to get there, and when we get there, I know everything's worth a random amount. So I don't care about any of this. We just show up, roll dice, and unload, and it's not a meaningful choice. It's a rule that, I mean, I guess the last thing I'll say is like the essence is, there are rules that you don't use, and then there are rules that you're not paying any attention to. Because I think that's the big thing I want to hand wave over. If the GM is just rolling a bunch of dice and a bunch of numbers are spitting out, and then they're making a result, and the players don't know what you're doing or why you're doing it, then it's not really a rule.
Right. A lot of this is about agency still at the end of the day.
Right. Rules are to communicate between you and the players what the hell is going on.
All right. And I think on that note, we'll go ahead and wrap up for today. That's it for Notes for the Aleph. We stream episodes bi-weekly, Fridays at 2 p.m. Eastern. You can join us live at Twitch at twitch.tv/Ractus. We also stream and record some weekly tabletop games. You can come join us and watch those at Sundays and Wednesdays, 10 a.m., 2 p.m., and 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Norm Rafferty here is a partner and writer for Sanguine Games. Check out our sanguinegames.com. Join us around Twitter. And, of course, look forward to the Book of Corals, which has all those vehicle rules we just talked about.
It's already out.
Yeah, it's already out. There you go. And, of course, go ahead and see Lessons Learned over at his stuff, over at Lessons Learned 1 on Twitch and YouTube. And, of course, check out all of his wonderful book series over on Amazon as well. So be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and come see us all again. Until next time.